Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolute secret sauce of sustainability reporting in the engineering and construction industry. It's a framework that solves a massive headache for the entire sector. How do we actually make sense of environmental, social, and governance data when we're trying to compare completely different companies? Let's dive right in and decode the numbers. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to tackle the data comparison problem, look at what activity metrics actually are, break down the big three metrics, figure out how to normalize those numbers, and finally, see how this all facilitates fair comparisons. Let's get right into it. Right, starting off with Section 1, the data comparison problem. Why is comparing companies often like comparing apples to oranges? Well, think about it. How do you fairly compare a massive global giant to a local builder down the street? When one company operates globally, juggling dozens of mega infrastructure projects, and another operates locally as a subcontractor in just one city, how on earth can we gauge their sustainability footprint fairly? It really is a classic apples to oranges dilemma. Okay, imagine comparing 5,000 environmental incidents, things like noncompliance with waste, air quality, or water discharge regulations, at a massive conglomerate versus just 5 incidents at a boutique regional firm. At first glance, the giant looks absolutely terrible. But if that giant has thousands of highly complex active sites around the globe, and the boutique firm only has one, well, those raw numbers are deeply misleading. Context is literally everything here. Which brings us to Section 2. What are activity metrics? This is the standardized solution from the SASB framework that permanently fixes our comparison problem. The crux of it is captured right here in the SASB standard introduction. Activity metrics are specifically designed to quantify the scale of operations by an entity. The whole point is to use them alongside other metrics to normalize data and facilitate a truly fair comparison. Think of them as a mathematical anchor. They completely ground raw, floating data into operational reality. SASB lays this out beautifully for the engineering and construction sector in a really precise, categorized way. And look, these aren't just random administrative figures someone made up. They are the fundamental, vital denominators we absolutely must use to understand a company's true size and operational volume at any given moment. They're the absolute foundation of everything we're about to discuss. Moving right along to Section 3, the big three metrics. We're going to methodically walk through the 3 specific activity measures that make up this foundational layer. First up, we have active projects. According to the standard, this gives us the scale of everything currently moving dirt or, actively on the drawing board. It's defined as buildings and infrastructure projects under development to which the entity was providing services at the close of the reporting period. So that includes both the design and construction stages. But, and this is key, it excludes any projects that were already commissioned during that period. Basically, this is our snapshot of present ongoing scale. Building on that, our second metric is commissioned projects. This captures the scale of work successfully completed and ready for use. The standard defines this as projects completed and deemed ready for service during the reporting period. Notably, the scope here is specifically limited to projects where the entity actually provided construction services. This tells us about the sheer volume of work that officially crossed the finish line this year. And finally, we have total backlog, which anchors the financial scale of the pipeline. The standard defines backlog as the value of projects not completed at the close of the reporting period. Basically, it's revenue that is contractually expected in the future but hasn't yet been recognized. You might also hear it called revenue backlog or unsatisfied performance obligations. This is a crucial metric because it shows us the financial volume of the work sitting in the queue, giving us a highly accurate scale for future operations. So altogether, we've got our present, our finished, and our future scale. Now we hit Section 4. Normalizing the numbers. Let's see how these 3 metrics actually step up as the mathematical denominators in our sustainability equation. Here is how the workflow breaks down in practice. Step 1. You gather your raw sustainability data, say the number of safety incidents or the amount of monetary losses from legal proceedings. Step 2. You take that raw number and divide it by your scale of operations using one of our foundational activity metrics. And step 3. Boom, you get normalized data. You turn a massive absolute number into a proportional rate that you can actually benchmark against any competitor, regardless of their size. The framework even builds this normalization directly into specific calculations for you, which is pretty brilliant. Take this number, for example, 200,000. When calculating the total recordable incident rate, or TIIR, for workforce safety, the SASB standard normalizes raw injuries against a base of 200,000 hours worked. Now, why that specific number? Because it perfectly represents 100 full-time workers putting in 40 hours a week for 50 weeks a year. So instead of a company just reporting a raw, confusing number of injuries, they report a rate that shows injuries per 100 workers. This instantly levels the playing field for measuring safety cultures across the entire industry.
Which brings us to our fifth and final section, facilitating fair comparisons. Let's tie this all together and see how normalization is applied across various critical ESG topics.
Let's take a second to look at how these metrics interact with specific sustainability risks. Starting with structural integrity. To measure the monetary hit from defect and safety-related rework costs, we have to know if that cost is proportionally high or low, right? We do that by comparing it to the total volume of active projects, or backlog. Now, moving to business ethics. The standard asks for the amount of backlog located in the 20 lowest-ranking countries on Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. Look, $1 million in risky backlog means something very different for a $10 million company than it does for a $1 billion company. And finally, for climate impacts, we analyze the amount of backlog tied to hydrocarbon-related projects versus renewable energy projects. By mapping these specific disclosures against the overall activity metrics, we can see exactly what proportion of the company's total business is exposed to these risks. It gives us the whole story. So the big takeaway here for investors and sustainability professionals is that these activity metrics are the great equalizers. They turn absolute numbers into actionable rates. They enable true cross-industry benchmarking. They ensure large entities aren't penalized simply for their sheer size, all while holding smaller firms to the exact same proportional standards. By stripping away that distortion of scale, activity metrics reveal the true operational efficiency of any company. I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. The next time you sit down to evaluate a company's sustainability report, ask yourself, are you looking at the whole picture, or are you just looking at the raw, unnormalized numbers? Because as we've seen today, without activity metrics to provide that necessary context of scale, the data simply isn't telling you the whole story. Thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me, and keep questioning the data.